Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran paying a publicist $3,000 a month to get some ears on your new album, or else a scrappy upstart posting to Instagram stories 36 times per day for the same reason, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the last Friday of May 2020, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Banzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Banzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Alejandro who drove a Mitsubishi Mirage with stolen tags and who was always trying to sell you psychedelic mushroom tea that he had steeped in a vintage thermos. And old Alejandro would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Banzoogle. Banzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. It's a wonderful product. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to banzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream, man. I'm live, I'm playing tunes, I'm taking questions in the live chat, I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I'd like to think that we're building something of a community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. Every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, head to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay, but that you just choose to pay because you dig the show, and you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time to do that. And if you're not in a spot where you can help out that way, it's totally understandable. You could still help out the show by first leaving us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, simply telling a friend about the show, spreading the word about the show to somebody who you think might dig it. The simple math on those last two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. So thanks to everybody who's taken the time to do that. Thanks to all of our supporters over at Patreon. And I'll end all the harassment there. I really hope that you enjoy this week's conversation with Mando. Our guest this week is a native Texan who spent much of his career in the liner notes of other artists' albums, but who has recently stepped forward with a new intensity as a recording artist himself. Mando Saenz cut his teeth in the Texas songwriting scene along Hayes Carl in the early 2000s. Hayes is one of our favorites here on this podcast. From there, he landed work in Nashville, working as a professional songwriter for many national acts. He relocated to the Music City and went on to pen songs for Miranda Lambert, Midland, Aubrey Sellers, Lee Ann Womack, and many others. All along, though, he has kept the home fires burning on songs written and performed under his own name. His latest album, in that vein, was produced by former Wilco co-founder and drummer Ken Coomer. Rolling Stone has fawningly drawn comparisons between Mando's sound and that of Radiohead and Big Star. American Songwriter says that his latest album offers considerable cause for celebration, and the Nashville scene describes his sound as alt country meets power pop. Last month, I had a chance to catch up with Mando on the phone and hear about his journey so far. Mando Saenz, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You grew up in a military family, but it sounds like even though you moved around a lot, your formative years, at least musically, were in Texas. At what age did you end up in Texas, down in Houston, and what did the music scene look like when you got there?
Well, I actually ended up in Texas. I was in the fourth grade. My dad retired from the Army, so we had been moving around before then. But it was the fourth grade, and it was actually Corpus Christi was where I lived, from fourth grade through high school. I didn't end up in Houston until after graduate school in my mid-20s. And that's when I first started doing music as a career, or first, playing out live. Hell, my first time to play live was an open mic or whatever. I was 24, 25, in Houston. But to get to your question, Texas, always had an influence on me, even since the fourth grade, just listening to, the Willie Nelsons and whatnot. But it was in college that it really hit me with songwriters like, Lyle Lovett, Robert Earl Keen, and people like that, where I actually started diving into writing on my own a little bit. And that's kind of when that period of time, the live Texas music scene really started to get some momentum. For whatever reason, playing live was really becoming a celebration as much as anything, especially when you're in college and really going to see shows. So yeah, it was always a part of my musical life that really kind of sprouted there towards my late teens, early 20s.
People who aren't from Texas or didn't go to college there can't really understand what a strange thing it is that they have this whole slew of songwriters that are, older fellas that college students still go out to see, you know what I mean? Like they'll go out and that's their big Friday or Saturday night.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And, living in Nashville for the past 15 years, it's never really been the same in that sense. I've always thought you could, do a regional triangle from Nashville, kind of like you would living in Austin or Houston. But it's just not like, there's nothing like, going to Green Hall on a Friday night and seeing someone you've seen probably 50 times, and it never gets old.
I lived down there for a while, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And I don't know why it can't be replicated in other places. Because you're right, if you live in Nashville, it's not the same saying, all right, well, I'm going to do Memphis and Knoxville. I mean, those are both good music towns in their own right, but
yeah,
not in the sense that you're going to be going and there's this regular stop that you go to play. It has a built-in audience that will be added to your audience, your core audience. I mean, that just doesn't exist outside of Texas.
No, it doesn't. And I didn't realize how precious it was until, years after I moved. But, I get to go back quite a bit, not as much during this past year, obviously, but I still, it'll always be a part of my life, my culture, my musical experience, whether I'm playing or listening. And it's still, so much a part of me, even in Nashville. So I can't. Like I said, you just can't duplicate that, whatever that is, and why ever that is. It's just not. It's just not possible.
It's better beer and better barbecue, I guess. That's what's really keeping people there.
Well, yeah, something about that, but I don't know what it is down there, really. I can't even put my finger on what it is.
No, I can't either. I think people who haven't lived down there, you can kind of get a sense of it. I think it was the reason that people loved coming to South by Southwest for that one period of time, because you would kind of taste it for a moment for that week. But it was kind of hard to understand that that's kind of what it's like 52 weeks a year down there.
Yeah, actually, even I prefer when it's not South by Southwest or ACL or whatever. It's still the same. It's not. There's more parking available, but it's something about the culture down there, and it's not just Austin. It's all over. Even since I moved from Texas, and I went to college in Lubbock at Texas Tech, and even since I've moved from Texas, Lubbock's apparently some mecca for music and musicians and songwriters, like it always kind of has been, but I think even more so now for whatever reason. I just think, and it's living in Nashville, people would say, if there's some kind of outdoor event with music, people would go, wow, this reminds me of Austin. And I go, well, I thought people just did that everywhere, but apparently not.
It just kind of goes to show what a different business the two things are, of the medium of live shows and like a live experience, and then the medium of recorded music and how that's disseminated, because obviously Nashville owns the market on that and does it great, but you would think that those two things would go hand in glove, where apparently they really don't, because there's never been a great, huge recording industry to really come out of Texas.
No, I mean, there's glimpses of it, and there's still glimpses of it, I know, in Austin, and I say Lubbock again. There's been some great records come out of there. I remember Lloyd Maines had a studio up there and recorded, Richard Buckner, which is one of my favorite records, Bloomed. I didn't even know he was doing that, at the time. But there's glimpses of it down there, but nothing really, and I hate to say nothing compares to the Nashville recording process, because I think great music can be recorded anywhere, but there's such a wealth of talent here, and it's like no other. In the industry too is obviously here. So I think living in Nashville is great, but I like coming home to Nashville and spending a lot of time elsewhere, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. And yeah, like you said, like good recording can happen everywhere. It does happen everywhere to a certain degree. There's just something about Nashville. I think it is the confluence of talent as far as musicians go, that I did. The first record I ever did in Nashville was 2 records ago. And I literally couldn't believe the level of musicianship of guys and girls that were coming in. I mean, it was just, it's like they were speaking a language fluently, whereas when I had recorded in other places, people were having to read off a script or something like that.
Yeah, and I used to visit Nashville when I was still in Houston, because I'd already had a publishing deal up here, so I would come up periodically to do some recording, which I didn't even know what a demo was back then. We'd be in like Ocean Way and basically have Mark Knopfler's band in studio, and I'm like, so we're not making a record. We're just doing what, demos? Is that so? That's not a record. It still to this day blows my mind. The money that this town used to spend on demos, it doesn't as much anymore, because everybody kind of records on tracks a little more than, not me, but in that world. But just the level, like you're saying, of musicianship just goes. It's so deep and luscious with talent, and everybody's so good, and they really bring an emotional thing to the table. It's not like they're just mailing it in. Usually, in my experience, they're really getting in there and making it very as special as they possibly can. Whether it's a nice studio like Ocean Way or a house studio here in town, and I'm not sure where you recorded, but it's all very, very impressive and professional, but also I think they keep it as soulful as they can.
In my very limited experience, I would agree. So, will you take me back a little bit? Then you said you've graduated. You're out of graduate school. You started to play around Houston a bit. How do you get from, hey, I'm a guy playing at open mics in Houston, to a guy who is traveling up to Nashville to cut demos with Mark Knopfler's band? What does that time period look like?
When you think it's kind of crazy the way you say it like that, but yeah, it was a lot of luck, as well as I guess other things. But I started doing open mics, and I think it was a good time to be in Houston for songwriters that were kind of getting their craft together. It wasn't as competitive, I guess, as Austin or New York or LA or Nashville even. But it was just a cool time where, Houston had such a celebrated kind of songwriting community in the 70s, which I was just starting to really kind of delve into. And as I'm starting to write songs, I just kind of pulled a lot from that, because you could feel it was a palpable vibe there in inner Houston, inner loop there. So anyway, started playing open mics and like every day of the week pretty much. And eventually started doing, getting paid gigs here and there. And I was working at Whole Foods, and one of my friends, John Egan, just told me to quit Whole Foods and go make a record in San Antonio or south of San Antonio, in Floresville, Texas, with Tommy Dudamore, who's an amazing steel player, and he had this studio there. So we just made a record, and it was like my first 10 songs I had written, and it ended up, being a record that Frank Liddell here in Nashville got a hold of, because his sister was living in Houston, and sent it to him. And maybe I was actually on a tour with our friend Hayes Carl. Yeah. We were on our first tours together. He had a new record out, and I had one. I had that record out, but it was on a now defunct label, Southwest Wholesale. So he was promoting his first record. I was promoting my first record, and I happened to get a phone call from Frank Liddell, who was living in Nashville, and a producer, and had his own publishing company, and took a meeting with Frank. And then a few months later, I got a publishing deal. Well, and I was still living in Houston. And, just one thing led to another. And next thing you know, I'm in these fancy studios with, people like Richard Bennett, who is just, come on, that's like the guy who came up with the parts for Guitar Town and played in Neil Diamond's band, and just, and it's just crazy. It's crazy to think about. And it actually really hadn't hit me until you just kind of put it out there like that. It was kind of a quick period of time from just starting to play live and to being in that situation.
Did you have to change the way that you were working at that point? Now that, it sounds like you went from almost nothing being expected of you besides what you expected from yourself to, it just became your job overnight. Did you have to change things up, or did you just keep plugging away the way that you had been, trusting that it would be, that
well,
it would work out?
I was kind of just riding so blind. I think the naive part of me might have been worked in my benefit, because I still to this day don't like to know what goes on behind the curtain here in Nashville to a degree. I was just kind of doing my thing, and I was in a good situation creatively still, even being in a publishing situation. They gave me a lot of freedom to just do my thing, and have my first co-writing experiences, but not putting too much pressure on me to get cuts or anything like that. It was always trying to ride that line between artist and songwriter, which I'm still doing kind of to a degree, definitely focusing more on the artist side of things. But, I think the co-writing process might be the one thing that really, I've developed and become a lot more comfortable with since my first experiences in Nashville, and that's actually opened up a lot of doors and creative freedom for me. I think the collaboration part of what I do has been very, very rewarding. As scary as it was and as foreign as it was to me, being, just, there in Texas, writing in a closet pretty much by myself, when, first starting out. So I try to keep it as similar as I can, when I first started and as fresh, but, everybody kind of progresses in some senses. But I still try to keep it as emotionally and creatively in tune with, when I first started writing.
In your opinion, then, what does it take for a writer to be a successful co-writer rather than someone who just pens their songs by themselves?
Well, and I tell people this, I've never taught songwriting or anything. I still don't understand it. If someone figures out a process to write a song, to please let me know what it is. But
right.
I've come to, I think there's so much philosophy involved with it, because it's just understanding who you're with and not judging them or cubbyholing them, just trying to understand them. Whether you know them already or you just met, and you're writing a song, and just kind of like, a little bit of give and take, but just letting them be themselves and you try to be yourself. And a lot of times just kind of, cater to each other's, way of going about it. And it's different every day. Every experience, songwriting, co-writing experience has been different every single time. Even if it's someone that I've written with before, it's always different. So that's one of the things about it. It's just knowing that it's going to be different every time, but you learn little things here and there. A lot of times you circle back around to something that was said earlier or written earlier, and then, you make that the main focus of the song, things like that. But definitely learn to always respect someone else's input, whether you may agree with it or not. I've just learned to always respect what they're bringing to the table.
What was the most intimidating write that you walked into, and how did you get through it?
Ooh, that's hard. That's a hard one, because it's weird, because I've written with, well-known people, and I've written with people I've never met before. And I can't tell you I've been any more nervous from either one, because you're still just kind of, it's like you're naked. Someone told me once, co-writing is like going to the bathroom in front of someone. And I don't really, that's a pretty weird, but I can't think of a better way to put it either. So I've never been truly scared or intimidated by one person more than the other. I think the first kind of hero-ish or someone that I knew and listened to growing up that I wrote a song with was Kim Ritchie. And that might have been a little intimidating, but we're to this day, one of my favorite writing partners, and we're good friends now. But I think, it's just a matter of doing it. But I've never been so nervous that I couldn't do what I was, focused on, and then I've written with other people, household name types, and they're just, you just learn that they're just people with same insecurities as you have, and that's kind of cool.
Well, that means that if they have the same insecurities as I have, that means that they have a lot of insecurities.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised how similar musicians are and songwriters. At the end of the day, they're all.
No, that makes sense, though.
We're all tortured, man.
Right. Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Artists often feel a sense of insecurity that is completely incommensurate with their level of professional achievement. Mando's insight in that regard maps onto my own experience as an artist, and it also maps on to what I've noticed in the lives of other artists that I've been close to. And that feeling can be all-consuming, to the point where it can get in the way of the actual work that you have right in front of you. A feeling of nebulous, unfounded insecurity can take a hold of you when there's a song sitting right in front of you begging to be finished. But I suppose that is not a phenomenon that is just singular to artists and creators. And there's a poem by Kaveh Akbar that speaks to that feeling of being overwhelmed, completely consumed with a feeling, so much so that it blinds you to important realities right in front of you. It's entitled, "Orchids Are Sprouting from the Floorboards." Orchids are sprouting from the floorboards. Orchids are gushing out from the faucets. The cat mews orchids from his mouth. His whiskers are also orchids. The grass is sprouting orchids. It is becoming mostly orchids. The trees are filled with orchids. The tire swing is twirling with orchids. The sunlight on the wet cement is a white orchid. The car's tires leave a trail of orchids. A bouquet of orchids lifts from its tailpipe. Teenagers are texting each other pictures of orchids on their phone, which are also orchids. Old men in orchid penny loafers furiously trade orchids. Mothers fill bottles with warm orchids to feed their infants, who are orchids themselves. Their coos are a kind of orchid. The clouds are all orchids. They are raining orchids. The walls are all orchids. The teapot is an orchid. The blank easel is an orchid. And this cold is an orchid. Oh, Lydia, we miss you terribly. You've obviously, as you mentioned before, you've straddled this line between being, a writer who strictly writes and maybe writes for other people sometimes or with other people, then also a career as an artist, which seems to be taking off right now in particular, and which you're actually here to promote today. What have you taken from the process of writing for other people, writing with other people? What have you taken from that and been able to bring back into your own world where you presumably write by yourself a bit more?
Well, it's weird. This record, this one that just came out is mainly co-writes. And there's only one song on it that was written by myself. And you know what? There was never like that was the mission going in. Let's make a record of co-writes. It just happened to be what I've been doing.
Yeah.
'Cause I haven't put out a record in 8 years, and which is crazy. But I just been doing a lot of co-writes, being a working songwriter in Nashville, and I guess it's like I said, it's different every day, and I don't know if I brought anything. How much has really changed? I listen to these songs and I listen to my old songs, and there's still a lot of that same disillusionment. What the hell am I doing with my life? Kind of, or what the hell's going on? Kind of aspect. Not to sound precious about it, but it's just really. I don't think it's in a weird way. I don't think it's changed that much. I think songs are a little cleaner now lyrically because you have to. Obviously, when you're writing with someone else, the song has to make some sense to everybody in the room, which is usually no more than two people. So maybe the songs lyrically are a little cleaner, meaning a little more direct and less up to interpretation, as some of my earlier solo writes. But there's still that element, I guess, in the way I write that there's still some room for interpretation on some of these songs.
Do you think that move towards, clearer lyrics that are less open to interpretation, do you think that has been a move that has happened in the country music industry in general in the last 15 to 20 years? Or is that the way that it always was and you just had to adapt to it?
I don't think it's that part of it has changed a whole lot in country music. I mean, there's always, with a lot of country hits, current and past, there's always the play on words thing, and there's always that. I'm kind of a bit of an odd duck when it comes to writing so precisely, but there's an art to that, so I don't judge people on their ability to do that. But writing for myself, I've always just kind of written for myself, and if a song gets cut, it's usually just by happenstance. I'd use a baseball analogy. I just try to get base hits, and every now and then the ball goes out of the park, meaning it gets cut by someone else. But some of my favorite songs are the base hits. So I don't. And like I said earlier, I just go into this like I still don't know what I'm doing, pretty much.
Do you think those songs that end up being home runs, they're always destined to be that, or do you think that they're, to go further with this analogy, are there a bunch of singles that you have, as in base hits, that could have been home runs? They just never hit the right ear, or they just never got the right kind of momentum or life behind them. I guess my question is, are songs, is the cream always going to rise to the top in a certain way in that sense? Or is it just kind of random sometimes what takes off?
I think for me, it might be a little more random than others. I think, I mentioned demos earlier, and I think if a song is demoed well, and it just happens to match with the song itself, that is just presentable in a way that just really works for a particular artist that happens to be cutting or looking for songs at the time. But I've always been under the philosophy that the best way to present a song to someone that might cut it is them hearing it on one of your records. And I still believe, I believe in songwriters that are artists. I think they should, even if they get cuts and they make money doing it, I think they should keep making records, whether they're the ones singing on the radio or not. I just think that's the best way for songs to get cut, the most honest way. So to answer your question, there may very well be single base hits on some of my records that just hadn't been heard by the right person that may eventually cut it. But like I said, that's all happenstance.
Do you think it's important that songwriters should continue careers as artists just because it's the best way to also be picked up? Or do you think that it is necessary in some way to stay creatively alive?
I just think that Nashville needs real songwriters that make records, whether they're, I don't know how big a promotion you put behind them. I just think that this town is built on songwriters and singer-songwriters. And I just think it's important for them for their voices to be heard, not just their songs. Like I said, even if it never ends up on country, that version of their songs never end up on country radio, I think people love listening to songwriters make records.
I know I sure do. talk to me a little bit about the shift that's happened in the last 15, 20 years from album sales to streaming, because from my perspective, my main gig is doing exactly that. I'm a songwriter that puts out records to, a core fan base, and that's how it's always worked for me. So I've always been a fan of streaming, but I know some guys that have worked predominantly having cuts for other people. Streaming has been they're not such big fans of it. So where do you kind of come down on that, and how have things changed for you and your business in the last 15 to 20 years in that respect?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I don't really like to know what goes on behind the curtain so much, and maybe to a fault. But when me and you, I imagine we got started doing this around the same time, maybe me a little longer, but the climate's always been a little not what it used to be, progressively worse, perhaps with the streaming. But I don't know. I think the most important thing is for the music to get heard. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to grasp, because we should be getting paid more for our craft, or our fair amount. But I just don't know. I mean, I have some older friends that got big hits in the 90s, with people like Garth Brooks and stuff. And I couldn't imagine what it would be like to be in Nashville back then, where, I mentioned, demos sounded like records, and, real songs were getting cut and stuff like that. I just can't live. I can't live wishing I was in the past. I just kind of deal with the now, and just because and I'm sure you understand, this is what we do. I don't really see that changing much, and hopefully things get better in the regard of getting paid for streams, as opposed to just, being happy with a song being heard. But you know what? If people can get access to what we're doing, I think that's the most important thing. And playing live is also very important. I mentioned, songwriters making records, but I think they if they're anything like me, it's good for their head to play live. Maybe not as much as a lot of, touring artists that are on the road 300 nights a year, but I just think that keeps the juices flowing, and seeing immediate reaction from other people is important. And it's a good way to get paid too.
It can be. There's a lot of expenses, but yes, you can make some dough. I spent that's what I really invested the last 10, 12 years into, and so I have a love-hate relationship with the road myself. But yeah. No, there's definitely something to be said for it. What do you think? If a younger artist is listening to this right now, and they're thinking about breaking into the business the same way that you have, is there still relevant advice from when you first came into it, or have things changed so much in the last 10 to 15 years that it's just a whole new ballgame?
Well, they would know more than me, because I don't know what even my social media stuff, I'm still trying to, get better at that and stuff. And the world they live in is just different than the world I live in that regard. I would just say, stay true to what you love and what motivates you to be creative, and, play to your strengths to a degree, but also don't be scared to have breakthroughs. And it just depends on what their focus is on. Performing or songwriting, or both. I would just say do it for the right reasons. I can tell people I know that are in music that are doing it for the right reasons. Some people just like having their name on a T-shirt, and it's pretty easy to tell who those people are. So just do it for the right reasons is all I could say.
You were talking about earlier the idea of what it was like in the 90s, when not just country music, but all music was just flush with cash because of the advent of CDs. And I think then it would have been really hard to wade through the music business, because there would have been a lot of people who weren't in it for the right reasons. I really think in the last 20 years, there's been such a tightening money and revenue wise, that there's got to be a lot less people who are in it for the wrong reasons now, just because those damn people just end up going into real estate. You know what I mean?
That's a good point, and that's actually a happy point. I never really thought about it that way. But yeah, it's definitely a shift in the way music is heard. And yeah, you mentioned there's a lot of money. Even when I first moved to Nashville about 15 years ago, it seemed like every day there was a label, happy hour party, or a publishing house was having a big party. It was weird. It was like, in Music Row, you just walk down the street after a write and someone was having a big party, with live music. And that just doesn't happen at all anymore. Even during Christmas, Christmas parties were a big deal in the music industry, like extravagant. Now they cut down on that sort of thing. It just seems like everybody's just everything's tighter, a lot tighter. And if that's trimming the fat on people doing it for the right reasons and not, then that's a good thing.
It's so funny, man. As human beings, we're all so predictable. The minute that the money starts to flow, that's when the champagne starts to flow as well.
Yeah. No, I see on like Facebook or whatever, like industry people showing pictures from the 90s and the early 2000s. And it's just like, man, they're just having a ball, just really. And that's cool. That's great. I still see them like at happy hours, but they're in bars, not
Right.
not some party.
It's just not an open bar. That's all.
At a happy hour, like 4 happy hour, like a 2-for-1 special or something.
What would you say is the most significant way that your songwriting process has changed since the start, if at all?
I would say what I mentioned earlier, maybe just a little cleaner lyrically on the co-write stuff. But maybe, and even on when I'm writing by myself, maybe a little bit cleaner now that I think about it. I listen to some of my old songs, and it's just like, what the heck? I don't even know what I'm talking about. I just like the way the words sounded with the melodies, which there's something cool to that too. Maybe I should delve back into writing freer like that. And not really caring what if people understand what the lyrics are actually doing. Because usually I've gotten people tell me that they whether they like my songs or not, some of them tell me that it makes me kind of paint my own picture with the words you say. I kind of have my own interpretation. And so I don't really want to lose that altogether. But yeah, I think my songs might be a little cleaner just in general.
But on the process end, like you sit down to get something done for the day, what does that look like? Like what time of day are you usually working? Are you working in a studio of yours? Like how do you make that happen just on a nuts and bolts level?
Yeah, I've always been a write during the day kind of guy with coffee and all that. And just kind of usually just kind of play music and mumble melodies, and sometimes words come out. That sort of. I've always started with music, and I'm not sure your process. You're very much a lyric-driven songwriter. I'm not sure. That's an interesting question. I'd ask you. Do you usually start with music or words?
It's changed. I used to sit with like composition books in my early 20s and early 30s, and I would just write. And then I started to notice there was a real problem in that I would spend a lot of time working on a line, and then as soon as I took it to the guitar, I knew immediately that it wasn't going to transfer mediums. You know what I mean? Like worked really great on the page, but I knew immediately that it wasn't going to transfer mediums to being spoken out loud or sung out loud. And I'd already had 2.5 hours sunk into the damn thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I made the switch, I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, where I do guitar in hand. I usually have microphone and headphones on now because I want to be able to hear like immediately if I'm on the wrong track or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then if I can hear that I'm kind of on the right track, then I can take the headphones off. I can put the guitar away for a second and I can work on lyrics. But like, I got burned. I think I burned a lot of time earlier on in my writing career, just going down the wrong track for a really long time on songs and then being screwed. You know what I mean?
I used to do that too more than I do now, just writing in journals and not even like having a guitar with me sort of thing. But I think if you're anything like me, I wish I did more of that than I do now, because you'd be surprised if, like I said, you're anything like me, you might pull from those words you wrote at some other time when it actually does seem to fit, or you'll remember something you wrote. But I was like you, I kind of used to write in journals and coffee shops and stuff like that. I don't even really do that much anymore. I just kind of start with music and get that route. And it wasn't a real conscious shift for me. I just always been a start with music guy, just because melody just seems to drive my lyrics.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole thing that makes it not poetry. And that's what we really have over poets is the ability to use that kind of meter in real time and that melody. It can make something that doesn't look so profound in just a poem on the page become incredibly profound.
Yeah, and I think poetry is kind of musical, even when it's spoken. You know, it has certain cadence and rhythm and even pitch. You know, when you think about it, tends to have some kind of, you can dance while you're reading sort of a thing. You know, I don't know how you know, a lot of people in Nashville, they'll show up with titles, which is still the funniest, not funny because it works for a lot of people, but they'll just have a list of titles like hook. And when I came to Nashville, I thought a hook was like a melody hook, you know, something that sounded cool.
That's because it is.
Yeah, and I still think those are hooks, you know, melodies. But and they just read off a list of titles and usually like the play on words thing I was talking about earlier. And I have a list of hooks in my phone, but they're more just funny things that
right.
They're more of a joke, you know. And I can't cram hooks that are just words into songs very easily for whatever reason. Like I said, I think the music has to kind of drive the train on the words.
Some people are great at it. You know, like if you just hear the title of the Billy Joe Shaver song, "The Devil made me do it the first time. The second time I did it on my own." That's all you need to know about the song. You know what I mean? And he does it perfectly. But other times it feels really forced.
Yeah, he was so good. That songwriter. When he died, I was like, that's the most underrated outlaw by far. Just what a beast of a songwriter. Man, perfect.
He was a beast. Did you ever get to see him play live?
Sure, yeah. I opened for him a couple times.
Oh, right on.
Once in Houston and once maybe outside of Austin or whatever. But he put on a great show too.
He did.
Just kind of like his songs, just kind of gets up there and just, it's almost like he's talking and just but beautiful, perfect songs.
I only saw him play once, and it was deeply impactful. And what I really loved about his set, some people this isn't their style as a music listener, but for me, this is my style. I just want you, if you're a songwriter that I love, I want you to go up there and basically play me the 12 to 15 songs that throughout your entire career are what it's all about. You know what I mean? Like, I want the retrospective at the concert. I don't want the B-sides. I don't want some interesting new interpretation. Like, I want you to give me on a silver platter this thing. And I understand why people don't like that. I totally do. It's just my particular style. And he did exactly that. He came out and it was just, you know, Old Chunk of Coal and Star of My Heart and everything. And it was beautiful. It was a really affecting show for me as an artist.
Well, if I had that catalog of songs, those are the exact songs I would play too.
Hell yeah, man.
I mean, why would you not play those songs, you know, and you only have so much time to play. I think that's the ultimate goal, right? Just having a set list that is just one after the other, you know, and if you want to delve into B-sides, buy the record, you know. But I'm a fan of that too. You know, there's some artist songwriters that have that one song everybody wants to hear, but there's some that have those 15 songs everybody wants to hear, and that's where you get into that, Mount Rushmore type, level.
Yeah, the only person that I saw like that live was Tom Petty, and he had like 2 hours and 45 minutes of songs like that. I mean, it was just it was uncanny.
Well, and then he had like 15 more you wish he would have had time to play. There's another where that's like when he died, you just go, well, that's the American Beatles as far as song catalogs go. I mean, that's just just amazing. Wow.
I've read some interviews of people who have worked with him, and they said the main thing that they noticed about Petty was his ability to just channel raw material, just channel melodies, channel, lyrics married to melodies, just like a faucet opening up. And when you think about his work over, 30 or 40 years, I mean, it's you can hear exactly that.
Oh, and you talk about songwriting and processes. That's one that I do, and I'll admit it. Sometimes he's the one I go, what would Tom? I would say, what would Tom Petty do right now when I'm writing a song? Yeah. And because he has the ability to make something that you wouldn't think was cool sound really cool, in whatever reason, or just be really like it's okay to do this.
Yes.
This isn't cheesy. This is really, really badass, And if I could channel that somehow, sometimes I get through not getting bored with a song or not second guessing something I'm working on too much. And that, I can't think of a higher compliment to give an artist or a songwriter.
Well, and this circles back a little bit to what you were talking about earlier about how you thought it was important for the songs being cut from songwriters who are putting out albums of their own, because I think there is an element of a song where it's like, do I believe the singer of the song? And the more that you know about that person and who they are, it's like, yeah, I'm just going to believe a Billy Joe Shaver song a little bit more than if some buddy of mine who got too drunk last night and I had to carry his ass home. He could write me the same song, but it's different because it's a Billy Joe Shaver song. It's different because it's a Tom Petty song. And that kind of credibility comes from having those careers.
Yeah, and that's a good point. There's a Townes Van Zandt story. I think I heard him interviewed that, when Willie Nelson cut Pancho and Lefty, Townes was disappointed because he's like, I could tell he was reading the lyrics when he sang. And I listened to Willie's version. I'm like, well, that sounds pretty good to me. But even, Townes was like, no, it just, you could tell he's reading those lyrics. And Townes is funny because, he lived in Nashville and died in Nashville. But everybody talks. I go to some, older bars. Unfortunately, some are going away, but they still have the same bartenders that worked when people like Townes would come in. Maybe not the most impressive state but it's just like they're just they're just songwriters. They're just people that have just their tend to be just a bit tortured, but it's real. They're just being real, no matter how flawed it might be.
Well, that's what remains so appealing to me about this job a couple decades in is, as you get older, if you're even the least bit self-reflective, you are able to realize how flawed human nature is. So therefore how flawed, you kind of are as a person, and we all have these shortcomings. But the thing about writing songs is if you sit down and do it every day, if you go fishing every day, basically, there's that chance that you could land the big one, and you can make a perfect song. You can't be a perfect person. You know what I mean? But you can write a perfect song. I do believe that because I've listened to a couple perfect songs before in my life. And that's what kind of keeps me going. It's like, well, I can try to be a better person, but I'm never going to be a perfect person. But there's a chance that I could write a perfect song. You never fucking know,
I couldn't agree more. And it's almost like, I keep using sports analogies, but I suck at golf, right? But every time I play, I hit that one shot, where it's like, man, if I could do that all the time, I'll just keep coming back. But, songwriting is what we do. And it's like, yeah, that song is always still out there. It might even be more than one perfect song. And if I felt in any way that I didn't have that within me, just knowing, it's like there's so many different ways to write a song. There's so many different thoughts, melodies, words. It's endless and endless and endless. And so I've never thought, oh well, all the good songs have been written. It's just, you just gotta, and like you're saying, the more you do it, sometimes it's asked backwards. It's probably going to be, when you do write your perfect song, you might fall into it ass backwards, but I think that's what probably what perfect song. I don't think there's anybody that wrote a perfect song that they knew exactly what they were doing.
And if there is, we got to find him and kill him, or find her and kill her. Well, listen, man, this chat was a blast. Thanks so much for taking the time to be on the podcast, and congrats on the new release.
Thanks so much. This was really enjoyable for me, so I appreciate it.
This week's show is brought to you by Banzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Banzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Mando Saenz' latest album is entitled All My Shame, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.